I want to tell you about a new sponsor here on the program. It's our first sponsor in a while, but in this time of economic uncertainty, this is a great business for all of you to partner with. It's Dashing Media Management. New ways of talking to customers are being created left and right, and you need an expert to help guide you through that process. That's where my friend Lex Kramer and Dashing Media Management come in. They're able to help you with social media, blog management, content marketing, graphics, and pretty much all of your marketing needs. They're a one-stop shop. They feature flat rate pricing, transparent reporting, and Lex is just a great person to work with, a good friend of mine, and I hope that you'll support her. So I hope you'll reach out to Lex today at their website, dashingmediamanagement.com. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Find more great shows like this at wearelibertarians.com. Welcome to We Are Libertarians. My name is Chris Spangle. Our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking with your friends. Please visit our website at wearelibertarians.com for all of our other shows. This is a special series on We Are Libertarians called The Swamp Explained. I'm joined by Rob Quartel, who is a 45-year fly on the wall in Washington, D.C. Rob has worked for Republican presidential campaigns, government agencies like the EPA, and has been confirmed by the Senate to the U.S. Federal Maritime Commission. He's also been a candidate for Congress and Senate, and he's spent years working in the private technology sector, working with startup companies. Given his experience and iconoclastic viewpoints, Rob gives us a great insight into the swamp that makes up our nation's capital, and just in general, how does politics work and how do people in positions of authority think about things, which I think is on the mind of everybody right now. Rob, thanks for coming on. Well, I mean, for being a co-host on the show today.
Yeah. Where else can we go, Chris?
I have been doing so many interviews that I it just gets stuck in your brain.
Well, I've been doing podcasts from 9 in the morning until 5 at night, and I get so tired of them. I just cannot wait for my drink.
What other podcasts are you doing? Where can people?
No, not podcasts, Zooms.
Oh,
Zoom conferences.
Yeah, these are the worst. Yeah. Some of these have to be the worst shows you've ever watched in your life.
And of course, it's just amazing. You and I were talking before we went on about people who figured out Zoom and people who haven't. You made the remark that you thought you'd never have to explain Zoom to anybody else again, but I don't think I believe that.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there is an aspect, because I've done podcasting for almost 15 years, and so for the last 15 years, if you have somebody on, like, we had Noam Chomsky on once, and like Zoom was out of the question. Then it was Skype. Where you have Walter Block on, who's a 60-something economist, you're kind of walking them through how to set that stuff up, or you're just going onto the phone. And I never have to do that again. Everybody now in their life, this is great. It's perfect because now everybody can just pop up and they know how to do a Zoom. So
except there are still, I do think there are some interesting things around Zoom. So, the security issues, which, I think they've dealt with myself, both in terms of the protocols and the technology, but there are, the government basically is now not letting, at various levels, not letting people use Zoom. And in some cases, they will not let them use. So for example, I'm on a couple of boards here in Virginia, one at the state level and one a local growth, related thing here. And none of them can use Zoom. So they use just conference calls. And I must say, it feels incredibly technologically archaic. And notwithstanding the fact that I get really tired of 8 hours of Zooms every day, it is so much better to see people and to be able to try to, get some kind of connection that way. So, and I'm sure all of our listeners are experiencing all of the same things. So.
Yeah. So you're telling me the people that run nuclear weapons off of floppy disks and VA that has no computer, they can't figure out.
That's right. They can't use Zoom.
Yeah. It is funny because people, it's funny what people grab onto. Like there was that article about how Zoom's not safe, and a friend, their school sent out a mandate: do not record any of the sessions because hackers might break in. And you're like, hackers don't care about your they don't want to hear 15 kids being taught. They're trying to break into Mark Zuckerberg's Zoom to learn trade secrets. It is funny, but I wonder, because you are in the technology space, and the kind of transition to work from home and this kind of telemedicine, telecommuting, all that has been on the gradual slope up, but this is a huge acceleration. I mean, if you watch CNBC, they all say the one place that's never going to recover is commercial real estate, because if productivity drops 5%, then why pay for the retail space? I mean, so after this, do you think that there is a mass switch to telecommuting like this, or do people just like to be in person and talk, and that will never change?
Well, there are a couple issues to unpack in that. One is technology, one is sociology, and one is, as you say, real estate. So, just in terms of the technology, I think it is a huge breakthrough. I think you're correct that more and more people in business and all that will be transacted, and people will be more comfortable with it. It's not just government, by the way, that's still uncomfortable. So my wife is on a couple boards. They don't use it. They have board packages and things, but of course they're also, frankly, they're afraid of being hacked. The fix to that was that you can invite people in and control that and have moderators for larger groups and all that. So, but I think there's no question that a lot more business is going to be transacted on Zoom, and I certainly see it in the tech community. I see it in just about everything, that affects us in a daily life. And secondly, but on real estate, I actually think there's a big opportunity there. My companies operate out of a WeWork in Tyson's Corner, Northern Virginia, both tech companies. And I actually think there's a big opportunity there for WeWork to rebrand as a safe space. If you could, if they could have temperature, gauges, there's a temperature visual you can take at the door, and you fill out a thing that says I haven't been exposed, and if you can make it a safe space, actually I think people would come back, particularly if you brand it that way. And I don't know what you feel, but personally, I do miss seeing a lot of people in the flesh. I miss restaurants. I miss, in some ways, my life is a lot more rigid and stressful right now, not because of COVID, but just because I am scheduled all day long. And I used to do business meetings at breakfast, lunch, and cocktails. And you can't do that now. Now I got to turn it in a damn Zoom conference. So
yeah, there have been days where I'm like, I have worked so much harder. And
it's true.
Yeah. And part of it is that I'm able to get, and I've basically been told, like, prepare to work from home for the rest of the year. Which it's hard to do creative work when you're not in the room with people. Like there's something about, vibing off of people face to face that you get in a creative industry that you don't get elsewhere. But I am more productive because there aren't wasted hours of conversation with people in my office, or me in the break room just chatting it up with people. But then you start to miss that stuff. And I drove on the interstate yesterday for the first time in 2-3 weeks. And I was like, I miss driving. And then I got gas, and I was like, I want to go in and get a Mountain Dew, and I can't do that because there's a sign that says I'm not allowed to. And, so I think once we kind of get to a reopening, there's going to be that hunger to return to the life that I've spent 36 years doing the same things, my entire adult life, are going out, driving, getting gas, going in and using the restroom. Like, I had to go to the restroom big time. My bladder was full, and I couldn't go anywhere because all the insides of the gas station were closed.
If you'd had that empty Mountain Dew bottle,
exactly right. Yeah, so it's just like those weird little things that stink. But I really think that this has been. I did a show at the very beginning of it, mid-March, where I talked about how it was a good opportunity to reconnect with what was important to us, and I think that this has been good for me, and that I'm not as focused on the consumerism, and I'm sitting here at certain points going, I'm really enjoying the evenings where I'm just sitting there and doing whatever, or going for walks or reading, and it's slow, and I'm to have great relationships with people, and I missed out on so much of that the last couple years, especially because I've been so focused on work and money, like getting money to buy more stuff. And this has kind of broken that wheel for me, and I think for a lot of other people, where you go, that consumerism isn't as important to me. And so that's why I don't think you're going to have a V-shaped recovery, because people aren't going to go back to the same things that they were going back to. I think there is going to be a part of the workforce like me that is going to go, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to work as hard as at these certain things because I want to go have time to walk with my kids at the end of the day. So I think there are beneficial things
but
here.
Think about consumer behavior a little bit more. I don't know about you, but I get bombarded all day long, 10 times a minute by ads.
Yeah.
If I have just zipped across some ad.
In these uncertain times, Rob.
Yes, of course. And I click on something and don't buy it. It comes back at me for 3 days straight, every 15 minutes, And I will say, I know, and obviously we're all buying more online, and I'm out here on an island in a rural area, and I think my wife and I have probably quintupled the amount of the entire county's FedEx and UPS and all that. She's as one of the delivery guys said to her, as he dropped a big box of wine off, probably the fifth, case of wine he dropped off in the last 2 weeks. He said, "So some more COVID supplies here," and I must say, I think I probably am buying more than I would normally buy, partly out of boredom. Periodically, it comes across. So, and I will say, my daughter, who heads the digital companies for a digital strategy and businesses for a major consumer brand, she her quarter, she's up like a gazillion percent. I'm sure I can't say exactly what it is, but so all of those, that's coming. A lot of that's coming back. The Chinese consumers are coming online. Asian consumers are coming, and of course, all of us are sitting at home. Then the problem is going to be, as you say, in the physical real estate. How do people reinvent themselves? And I think there will be a lot of reinvention. Neiman Marcus is probably going to go bankrupt this week, I think, and several others have. And but people are creative, and it's I just think people want to actually see other people at some level and create experiences. It's only one dimensional on a screen.
Yeah,
I can see you there, Chris, but it was more fun riding with you in the car during a snowstorm a year and a half ago.
We are
and talking.
Right. We are still the same animal we were 10,000 years ago. Like there's still,
right.
And that's part of why the internet is a blessing and a curse, because you get to see the animal brain so often on comment threads. But but I get it. I get that this has been a huge disruption. And I think there are people that I personally talk to online that I saw, I recognize the names because they're repeated commenters, and it's been funny to watch them go from this is all fake, this is a hoax, to, the numbers don't add up on the thing that is a hoax, to now I'm fighting for the unemployed, to now it's back to a hoax because the models didn't add up. And so I think let's talk about the protests a little bit in the reopening, because on the one hand, I look at the protests and I understand totally the impulse to have the protest. I don't understand the impulse in the way that the protests are done. Like, I firmly believe that the coronavirus pandemic is real and that it is dangerous, that if I get it, it's probably not going to kill me, but it also could kill someone that is vulnerable that I come into contact with. Mm-hmm. So I'm making choices to stay home. Like I said, I hadn't driven. I've only gone 2-3 locations in the last 2 months or whatever. So when people invited me to come to the protest at the State House, where a few hundred people showed up, I mean, it was 300 to 500 people, there was no chance I was going to go wade into that petri dish. Like
right.
But I get why people are upset, and I understand that. I understand the message. So I'm not. You look at the media, and they're kind of just not getting what they're talking about. They're mad about the unemployed. They're mad at the government for the shutdown. I think there's a little bit of gray left not in there that. In my mind, the protesters are right that the shutdown in certain businesses was more severe had it just gone on, right? Like,
Right.
there's no real epidemiological reason that a liquor store should be open but a florist should be closed. It's just that
excuse me.
Yeah, right.
It's an internal cleanser, sort of like Lysol.
Right. But if you walk into a liquor store, it's the same size and space as a florist. It's just the liquor store has better lobbyists. And so it gets and then you get the tamping down of people on beaches and Walmart not being able to sell seeds. And it gets to a ridiculous level. And so that spurs the protests. So I'm not against the protest, although I think like in Israel where they had like a 6-foot rule, it was a beautiful photograph, or Michigan where they stopped traffic with cars. Like, I wish it had been done more responsibly, because I think it makes us look bad. It makes us all look like we're Looney Tunes when we don't respect biology. And it sort of pushes the message of, if the government didn't exist, I was going to do the wrong thing anyways, which is not a great look. So what were your impressions of these protests?
Well, so some of that is, again, you and I've discussed a little bit of this, the differential geography. So, I live in a county with 8,000 people on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. We had 2 cases, a husband and wife, who got sick but weren't hospitalized about 6 weeks ago. And so that meant they were exposed probably 2 weeks earlier than that. So it's April something, anyway, back in February. The several counties around have had only a handful of cases. Nevertheless, this is a commuting workforce. My county has, out of 8,500 people, roughly 8,000, 8,500, only has about 1,200 kids in K through 12. So it's very small population, much older. Obviously, target high levels of obesity. People smoke. Typical rural area. And I would go to the grocery store here locally once a week, and I'm wearing a mask, and I go in and I am the only person in the store wearing a mask, but for some young woman who's maybe 25 years old. And the employees aren't wearing them. I asked one employee why she wasn't. She said, well, I know I should, but it's uncomfortable. And besides, nobody here has it. And yet this is a county where 40% of the workforce commutes south to Newport News, to the shipyard and those associated industries. And where they commute to is is one of the hot spots in Virginia. The Hampton Roads, Newport News, Jamestown, James County, Williamsburg area. And some of that is because, again, it's people who travel. They're military, a lot of military people, a lot of well-heeled retirees. And one of the communities was a retirement community. And obviously that became a hotspot, interestingly, not a home, but a community. And so and then to amuse myself, I would every so often, once a month, drive an hour south to a Whole Foods, and I'd go in there. And for the last 6 weeks, they've been wiping down the carts. People are wearing masks. Most of the checkers were, not all of them, until this last weekend. And most of the shoppers were wearing masks, and everybody's keeping social distancing. And I think everybody's probably noticed in the grocery stores, although not everybody obeys it, just like protesters. There are one-way direction signs in your grocery store now. If we can't get home delivery of groceries out here,
right?
So we actually have to go get them and go pick them out. So in that grocery store, some guys, older than I am, comes up close to me with his cart, and I put mine between the two of us, and he says, well, I'm not worried. We're in X County. I'm not going to name the name, but you've probably heard me talk about it before. And we're not going to get it. I'm 75 anyway. And I said, well, I hope you make it to 76. And part of me was thinking, I hope you get a mild case. But I didn't really. You really wouldn't want to wish that on anyone. But so I do think you made the point earlier that different kinds of businesses and but it's also geographies. And, I don't know what your county is like and your city, state, what kind of building you're in. I'm sitting out here on 6 acres, and there are a couple of friends that we like to see in small doses, and everybody's very careful. And I go out and walk 1.5 miles to the post office pretty much every day. And, whip my bandana out when I get into the post office, and I use a plastic bag to open the door because, that's the most visited place on the island. So you're right. I do think there is a natural tendency for people to, particularly in similar circumstances to this, who haven't seen a lot of it, to believe that it's not going to affect them. And come on, let's get this over with.
I think I'm in a position where my mom's a nurse and she works at an outpatient surgery center. She's had a cushy position for 25 years and she's been called to the ICU. She's caring for COVID patients. She's working
probably scared to death.
14. Yeah, she's scared to death. They're all terrified of it, and because they're seeing it, they're touching it, they're around it, they're watching people die, and so I have that perspective. And
now the researchers keep discovering new conditions that come out of it. I mean, like just recently, they're now seeing a number of young people dying from essentially strokes, getting blood clots. So that's the latest, out of the research.
Yeah, there's the 6 new symptoms added today by the CDC, and so I get that there are a portion of people who have to see something to believe it, touch it, feel it, sense it, before they understand it. But those are the same people who would have gone to those protests who are sharing with me that Sweden did it differently. Why didn't we do it that way? Well, if you read anything about Sweden and talk to Swedes. Like AIER wrote a great article from a Swedish libertarian, and he's like, everyone here is taking it super responsibly. They're being responsible for themselves. They're taking it seriously. They're doing the right things. Like, that's what's going to be required. Like, freedom still carries responsibilities, and you didn't really see the government start to act until St. Patrick's Day, when it looked like everybody was going to stay open, and that's when they acted. And so if you're not leading the charge to be responsible, then you're going to end up with 80. I mean, here in Indiana, 80% of the state thinks that Governor Holcomb did the right thing with these shutdown orders. Only 17% of people disagree, and so it's hard to it's hard to take seriously somebody who clearly doesn't. And I don't know, we're kind of painting with a broad brush, but you talk to a lot of the people that went to the protests. They're not going to act responsibly. They never were going to act responsibly. And I just think that's a poor message. But I do appreciate that they are having these rallies, because I don't think that a lot of these governors would open up if it weren't for that pressure. I think they are giving voice to the very real, underreported voice of frustration at the government policies, but also just the situation itself.
Well, you have in any group of 50 performers, or 50 anything, a variety of performances. And so if you think about the governors as a bell curve and how they're going to handle this, they're going to be a couple down at the low end of what appears to be low end of intelligence. And unfortunately, most of those seem to be in the South, where I am. And then, and also in my party, unfortunately. And then you have some at the far end who are going to be overreacting the other direction. And then, but the vast majority are going to be in the center there. In all of these demonstrations, I think the governors have by and large they've hands off. I think they've done it in a way that allowed them to protest and come out. And but I have to believe that the local, I can't believe that the feedback any of these protesters are getting from other people is very happy. There's obviously will be some people that are tired of it, but here we go in Georgia, which by all accounts, almost everyone, including the president, agrees it has opened up too early. And you have restaurateurs and people running tanning salons and tattoo parlors. They can all go back to work, but some number clearly are not going to go by their own volition, because they're worried about both themselves and their clientele, and most especially about their own families.
Yeah, and this is how it, in my mind, how it should have always been operated. It should have been, the burden should have been on the individual. It should have been on the individual business, because realistically, the governor can tell you, hey, we'll threaten your license and make you shut down, but really the enforcement that Trump has or the CDC has or your governor has isn't all that great. There's too many of us and not enough of them. And so it's always going to be, you look at some of the pork plants here in Indiana or in South Dakota having to shut down. Well, these are essential businesses that didn't necessarily operate in a responsible manner, and now they're going to suffer the consequences of not taking it seriously, which unfortunately puts our food supply in a lot of danger. And the more risk that people had to carry, the more important it would have been. But I think
they also put their employees in danger. And one of the plants had like 800 employees, and some number of those people will die. And so I would push back and say this is where the company. You can say the company will pay the price. Well, no, those people will pay the price. And
but aren't they? I mean, I'm seeing Daryl Isaacs, the Hammer, the local attorney who has bought every billboard on the interstates, running ads saying if you have a liability situation around COVID, feel free to call me. I'd love to give you free advice. Like it
doesn't help if you're dead, though.
No, that's true. That's very true. But I think my point is that the two grocery stores that you talked about, from now on. From this moment on, it has to be about the individual's reaction, the individual's responsibility, the business's responsibility, and understanding that your choices really do affect other people's lives in this situation.
Yeah. Well, I think this is where the issue of reopening. I would agree with you more on the reopening issue, that this is where individual business owners have to think through, the micro impact of what their decision is. Do they do it now? Do they wait a little longer? I see that a lot, but I think it would be, we would have had that would have been 100 times worse if they had not issued stay-at-home orders for everyone. But we'll see. Of course, remember what Tony Fauci said, our favorite swamp monster, my favorite, the favorite of everybody's. Said a long time ago. He said that, if at the end of this we look back and say we did too much to stop it, that's fine. That's still better than looking back and say we didn't do enough. And that's a legitimate choice of positions. And
I think it was the head of the Ohio Surgeon General or whatever. She's like, I think her quote was very similar to that. It was, basically, we're going to get hit no matter what we do. Like, if we're going to be too overreaching, we're not going to have reached enough.
That's right.
It's never, and that's just part of being in a free society. Nobody's ever. I think if you're a governor, it has to be a tough choice. Trump recognizes the choice. He said it's the biggest decision he'll ever make because everybody's letting Georgia go first as somewhat of a crazy, horrible experiment to see what happens there, and then they'll open up if it's all fine and they'll clamp down tighter if it doesn't. And if you're a governor, you have the very real risk of people getting hurt, and you also have the risk of civil unrest, if you don't, because what these protesters are talking about is very real. Food banks are at their max, unemployment is at its max. These are very dangerous conditions. So I think part of to relate it back to the swamp, when you are in a position of leadership, it is very difficult to navigate these choices and to know what to do. And then on top of that, knowing that you're never going to make everybody happy.
No matter what you do, it's you're going to get blamed for it. So, and of course there are a lot of, and now of course, who's going to be the fall guy? This morning we hear that Alex Azar, Secretary of HHS, is being pushed, and of course he says he doesn't have time for this Beltway intrigue. But
I think his father.
That's the first sign, right?
Yeah, didn't his father just pass away from COVID?
I don't know.
I think I read that.
Terrible if that's true.
But he kind of should be the fall guy. Like, if you read the last month in the New York Times, like you look at the CDC, the FDA, like Azar should be the fall guy. He was in charge of those agencies.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it elevates Peter Navarro to a level I can't stand. One of my least favorite people on the planet.
Why is that?
I think he started life out as a left winger, and now he did this 180, and now I don't know how to call him a right winger, but he used to be a big free trade guy. Now he's a big anti-trade guy, anti this, anti that.
Right.
And of course, he's the biggest supporter inside the White House for the Jones Act. So you know how I feel about that.
Okay.
And I personally think he's an idiot. But
he's the architect of the tariffs. He's really kind of crazy.
He's people I know him and who work with him just think he is completely intellectually off the reservation, and that it's not because they think there's a single path, but it's ideological and all in its own way. But
so
anyway, but they're talking about Deborah Birx. Maybe is the next secretary.
Ooh, well, congratulations.
So speaking the other person is the woman who
go ahead.
Medicare.
Okay.
Yeah.
So speaking of intellectually decrepit, let's talk about Trump and his responsibility, because this is the ultimate conversation on all the Swamp Monster shows this morning, as we record this on Sunday. Right. So Trump, and this is so typical of all of the Trump presidency. Trump vaguely hears something from someone somewhere that there's a way to disinfect the lungs or UV light kills the virus. And so he goes out, like most of us do this. We vaguely hear something in the headlines and then we repeat it as if it's a fact. And then people go, I don't think that's true, except the fact that he's the president of the United States and doesn't seem to recognize his own responsibility. And then you go, hey, this thing that he said is incredibly stupid. And they go, well, that's not what he was. The fake news is misquoting him. It's like, no, don't gaslight me. I literally watched it live. It wasn't taken out of context. Then the next day he says he was being sarcastic, which no, you weren't. And then all the people who said you heard the wrong thing go, it wasn't fake news. It's just CNN took his joke out of, and nobody ever goes. Now the conversation is stop airing the press conferences. It's not the press conferences that are the problem. It's the president. Like I've gone from give the guy the benefit of the doubt in January to I've watched all these press conferences and I can't believe how incredibly ill-equipped and dumb this person is. And I have full Trump derangement syndrome now because I've actually watched the person talk. And so you just go, it isn't the press conferences. It isn't the fake news in this instance. He does get a raw deal, but he also doesn't go, if the press doesn't give me a raw deal, maybe I should speak more carefully. Like there's never any responsibility that he's held to. Nobody ever holds him accountable for what he says or doesn't says from within his own camp. It's truly bizarre. I don't get it, Rob.
Oh, yeah. Well, press conferences have their own long 100-year history, ups and downs and sideways and everything else, and good press secretaries and bad, and and so you think about this. So Trump was so different during the campaign partly because he was available to the press, and he said a lot of outrageous things. But he'd call up the show, he'd call up the left, he'd call up the right, he'd call up the reporter. He always had a remark. Sometimes it disguised his voice. And then all of a sudden we didn't have any when he became president. So, the onslaught, and now he's back to kind of that position. I'm gonna tag you with a little pressitis here because I think that you're correct that he said what he said. But when I heard it, and unfortunately, my wife and I have gotten this phase where we, like a lot of people, I'm afraid, we finish our work, we get our drink, we sit down at 5:30, and we turn on MSNBC or somebody else, and we watch the Trump show, and until we can no longer stand it, and it may be taken off the air, if the ratings aren't good enough, I guess, but. So we have been watching the press and watching Trump back and forth, and my wife dislikes him even more than I do. Accused me of being an apologist, which I'm not. But what Deborah Birx said, I think is probably correct. I think he is a guy with no governor. What she said was he was musing out loud, which is what he does. You're correct that he hears something, and his mouth goes into gear about that. Now, some people can muse out loud carefully and objectively, and most of us don't do it in front of the National Press Corps. So if that's his style and everything else, I get that. I think it's unhelpful because between his musing out loud about the use of disinfectant internally and the press harping on it long enough, there are now people who are going to try to do it.
No,
and that is a joint outcome in my mind. It's not just because Trump said it. It's because the press has been playing over and over and banging away at this drum. And that's, they aid each other. I'm sure, I don't know if I said it last time, but there's one of the reporters, I can't remember, it's a young woman reporter who just badgers every single time. And the last time, after she interrupted him 4 times on a question, he said, "Enough." And I'm sitting there thinking, that's exactly how I feel. And I'm not sympathetic to him. He's made his own bed, but as an American citizen, you really get tired of this back and forth. And
no,
I don't think it's helpful.
I totally agree with you.
And it's all gotcha. Every bit of it's
that
gotcha.
Trump does get a raw deal. All Republicans do. You watch CNN yesterday. Yeah. It was just minute after minute on CNN yesterday was Democratic mayors talking to reporters. And the question was, do you agree with your Republican governor? It just always happened to be Democratic mayors with governors that were Republicans.
Right.
Yes. That's
particularly true on MSNBC.
Yes. And so you always have this constant drumbeat of gaslighting from the
Obama
other side.
Officials and,
Donna Shalala calling in, ragging on DeSantis. I totally get it. But there does have to be a certain point where we go, yes, those people are bad, but the person also should have the responsibility of being more careful with what he says, because he does know that he's going to be taken out of context. He does know that they're going to that the injecting disinfectant thing has now morphed into drinking bleach. And Dr. Box, who's head of the Indiana Department of Health, said they have actually gotten people calling and going, "Is this a thing? Can I do this?"
Yeah.
But then on the other side, you get the New York. There was a report out that 58 people had called in about drinking bleach. Well, the normal number is like 59 or something. It was I don't have the stats right. Elizabeth Nolan Brown from Reason tweeted it out, and that's the dishonesty that you're talking about, is that they make it look like this thing that happens normally is only happening because of Trump. They're completely obsessed with the guy, and it's unhelpful, and it just cements in his supporters' mind that he's the only person to listen to, and they must have taken him out of context, even though they didn't in this case.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't taken out of context, I don't think at all. I mean, he was certainly taken out of a conversation, and of course, I'm sure you saw the big New York Times article about the light, heat, and light, which came
right.
Typically, he doesn't actually go to the briefings before the briefing. He walks in and gets a few minutes, 15 minutes about the key talking points. It's on a piece of paper. He makes some notes and he goes out and ad-libs after he reads the first remarks, and which is how he gets in trouble. But apparently this time there's a researcher, I can't remember, and from it may have been from one of the military hospitals or something, who had been doing studies, and they were directed studies. They wanted them to look at the impact of light. A lot of people I know people who take their mail and put it out on their patio in the sun to disinfect before they pick it up again. And so they're testing all that, and that's legitimate research. And the guy apparently he briefed them, and then someone, I think the chief of staff, probably snuck him in basically to see Trump 15 minutes before the show. And so that he's walking out of it with that as his last thing. And the guy's talking about, you spray Lysol and it disinfects it in 1 minute, and you wash your hands for 20 seconds and it breaks the lipids. And of course, this is what's going through his brain. And it's not good, but I also think they overdo it and overdid it. And I don't think it's helpful to anybody.
No, it's an off-the-cuff comment that doesn't deserve a full week's treatment 24/7 on the cable news channels. Of that, I agree. I think that if I were a Trump supporter or a Republican, I would be very disappointed that every time we got a victory, he shot us in the foot. And it's at some point you have to go, I just can't do this anymore. I got to check out of the fights. And what that does is that just leaves people that can't handle the back and forth between the press and the president all the time. So they just check out, and that just creates an unsafer environment. And it's easier for vague conspiracy theories to start creeping in, and because neither of them act responsibly, and it's not about picking a side. And I think that's the thing that I disagree with the most, is that we always have to, libertarians always seem to come to the rescue of the right or the Republicans in this situation. And there does have to be a certain point where we have to go, yeah, the press sucks, but maybe he should speak more carefully.
Yeah, well, but I think and I think people are just making excuses, and you know what? However, if we get out of this at the end of the summer with only a mild return, or in the fall with a modest return, he will be, and the economy starts to come back. He will, his numbers, he'll win. Yeah, and you can't hope that we have anything different than a recovery, but yeah,
that's part of what he's pushing. He wants to get the economy
back. That's absolutely what he's pushing, and there's a danger in it, and I think he must see the danger in that.
There's another,
now the big new argument, Chris, is going to be between the states and the official swamp, which is the senators, congressmen who actually live there as much as any swamp creature, as you well know. And now it's like, the Republicans on the one side are starting to think about deficits, and can we have $3 trillion deficits? What if we're at the highest level of aggregate deficit since World War II by percentages, and that is a scary kind of thing. On the other hand, we have people like Tom Cotton, Republican conservative, supposed conservative from the South, who, what did he propose? I think he was proposing that the government should pay up to 80% of employees' salaries for the next, as far as you can see, until this was over.
Yeah, so, Hawley, it was hilarious to watch Josh Hawley run an ad online against socialism when he's proposing paying $2,000 to every citizen for the common. There's like a new version of compassionate conservatism, which is like
get me reelected.
Yeah, common good conservatism, where it is kind of crazy. I just watched a documentary on Detroit and about Detroit's rebounding, and they were able through bankruptcy, because the states and lots of major cities are basically saying we're going to have to file bankruptcy if you don't bail us out. And what you see in the bailout of Detroit, or the non-bailout of Detroit, because the Republicans in the House and Senate just wouldn't do it back during Obama's era, is that bankruptcy allowed them to restructure a lot of pensions, a lot of their debts, and it led to Detroit rebounding quicker and better. It's just that unions don't like that, because their deals get broken, and so Democrats are going to scream tooth and nail to protect the unions. And Trump, who wants union votes, is going, yeah, I'm interested in a conversation about it. So it'll be really interesting to see if these states and cities do get bailed out.
Well, as someone who lived through, remember during the Ford era, New York City was about to go bankrupt, and in fact did. And the President Ford, refused to extend or support aid to New York, and there was the giant headline: "Ford to New York, drop dead."
Yeah, that's right.
In forage, and some would say that was one of the factors leading to his losing the election, because he lost afterwards some areas of the state. The Republicans had a much broader electoral base in those days, and obviously we do now, both demographically and geographically and everything else, and that was one piece of the puzzle.
So were there bodies in the streets? Did millions die when New York filed bankruptcy, Rob?
I don't know. That's a good question. There were probably more people who got sick, and probably some bondholders jumped off buildings. But.
Yeah, I don't know. It's silly. So I want to jump back to the press argument, because this will obviously be something that Biden will weigh in on. Yeah. There are sexual misconduct allegations against Joe Biden from a former staffer, the woman's mother.
Wait, what? I haven't read anything about him.
And that's the problem, is all of a sudden everybody's applying different standards to this guy. And there's actually, did you see the Larry King clip from the 90s where the girl's mom called in to Larry King basically saying this is what happened? And so it's all the Bernie bros are trying to use this to get Biden to resign so Bernie can get the nomination. What? And there's a lot of Democrats who are hoping to get Biden off of the ballot and put Cuomo up there. So what do you think? Is Biden the nominee?
I think Biden's still the nominee. I think I said last time, I think if he were smart, he'd put Cuomo on the ticket. I mean, I like Amy Klobuchar. I think it'd be great to have a woman. Stacey would be interesting. I don't think she'd bring anything to the ticket. I think that I have thought through the issue of Bernie or Elizabeth Warren, but I do think either one of them would be more energizing than Joe Biden. Yeah. But Biden's got a problem. He can't. You have to be very careful in times like these. And what he should be doing is raising a lot of money and spending it on voter outreach and getting people registered and voting early. So that he had some of that in his pocket. But I think it's very hard to do any of that. So, but you're right. This thing about my first reaction, I saw this 2 weeks ago. We saw the Biden reports, and it's not the first time they've been in public in the media before. But they had about a 6-day half-life, including 2 or 3 anguished. How do we consider Joe? Is he different than than Trump kind of thing? Op-eds in the New York Times and the Post and all around and then of course comparisons to the Kavanaugh situation. He said, she said, we all have to acknowledge he's a very difficult and I think Biden's excuse certainly for the touching, which women would call groping, which he called touching, was that it was different times, in his day, which is not much older than my day.
Yeah.
People were a little more, politicians were more like that. And men, certainly all of us are generally in business afraid to put our arms around the shoulder of a female coworker and say, great job. Whereas we would not have that problem with a man. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether it's real or not. I'd say probably 50% of what happened around Trump is real. He certainly used to brag about it. So, but there would be people who would say, well, he would just brag about it, but he didn't really do it. So.
Yeah, and Biden's case is not helped by the pictures of him swearing in people in the Senate and touching people's daughters and wives and that image that's kind of been the main. Believe it or not, memes on Instagram stories and on Facebook and Twitter, like the memes have, it's a constant reinforcement of a certain message, which is why so many Trump supporters were so mad about Clorox bleach memes around Trump, because they know how devastating memes can be. And that's partly how Trump won. And so the meme around Biden has mostly been 2 things: that he is mentally incapable of being president. He's too old. And then number 2, he's creepy Uncle Joe. And so when you get a story like this, the conservative
plays to it.
Yeah, it just plays to it. And then when everybody goes, all right, believe all women Biden and Alyssa Milano and the Me Too movement and the New York Times and everybody who was so eager to bring down Brett Kavanaugh are all shrugging on this, it just really, it looks bad for them and calls credibility. I don't know what you think, but credibility is a huge metric.
I think this is a very difficult area in general. I think all the way back to Bob Packwood, who was a darling of the Republican left, a brilliant senator and everything else. And, he was caught up on exactly this kind of scandal. And then, of course, we had, what's his name from Minnesota, who resigned, the comedian.
Oh, Franken. Yeah.
Franken. And Al Franken sort of afterwards said he regretted that he'd resigned. He really wished he'd waited it out. And of course, one of his biggest attackers was an early presidential candidate, the female from New York. And
Gillibrand.
Gillibrand, right. And Gillibrand. And so people, it is politics. We know in politics, people are two-faced and they're always gauging the impact on their own situation. And Republicans are the same way. Republicans were the same way with down in Alabama, on that race, and until the very end. I think Trump was all the way in there, almost at the very end, on endorsing this cat,
Roy Moore. Yeah.
So there's not, it's going to happen. I have a hard time imagining Joe Biden attempting to rape somebody, but I don't have a hard time imagining him doing something much less.
Right.
But I don't think it's going to have any impact whatsoever. Maybe he'll have to have a woman. Maybe that'll that actually reinforces that he needs to have a woman on the ticket. I continue to think that Amy Klobuchar is his best choice, but he needs excitement, and she's not going to bring that either. And as they say on the VPs, the main thing you need to worry about is that you don't need to worry about them. They don't. All they can do is hurt you. So
right.
So he's going to have to get someone who's disciplined. Pence was a great choice for Trump. Very disciplined. Scared the hell out of me, still does. And God knows I wouldn't want him to be president. But he was very disciplined. He's a perfect vice presidential candidate and perfect vice president. So hopefully Biden is doing something. Hopefully this is under control enough by the end of May, June, mid-July, that they can do their conventions and kind of relaunch. And, Trump's got some of this issue. He likes these big rallies. He likes their impact on the evening news. So
yeah, that's a good point. On the Libertarian side, it looks like
Congressman. Who are you going to have?
It looks like Congressman Justin Amash he has been toying with the idea, and frankly, he's toyed with the idea too long. And now there is a very real concern that he won't win over. That people have. Nobody knows when the convention's going to be at this point or how it's going to operate, but. There's one guy named Jacob Hornberger who is a libertarian media person. I subscribe to his newsletter. Great thinker. Then there's Judge Jim Gray, who was Gary Johnson's 2012 running mate, who's running, and he has a dynamic VP pick in Larry Sharp. And then there's Vermin Supreme, the guy with the boot on his head from Vermont, from the Democrats in 2012. And, it sounds crazy, but he's got a good satirical angle and so I get why he has the support he has. And then now Justin Amash is looking at entering the race, and a lot of people have kind of lined up behind other candidates. And so it may hopefully not be too late, because I'm an Amash fan. I always have been. And I think, you tell me if I'm wrong, but people like yourself who are... you're not a Libertarian Party person. You're ideologically not a libertarian. Like, you're sort of in the camp, but like Justin Amash, I guess, would be somebody that you would vote for. That he would bring in an independent like yourself to vote Libertarian for. I don't know if it's the first time, but probably a solid vote in this election. What say you, Rob?
Well, I would say, the little I've looked at his record. I admire the fact that he was willing to break with the party, and he was technically a Republican, and I am a Republican. But my recollection is when I looked at his record, I thought he was actually probably much more conservative than I would be on a lot of issues. I'm a conservative who believes women should have a choice on things like abortion, and that the government shouldn't be telling them what to do. My recollection was he was kind of, in my mind, on the wrong side of that, but then so are most Republicans. Evan McMullen last time, was he an independent? He wasn't Libertarian.
No. He
was independent.
Yeah,
right?
he's many Libertarians, including myself, dislike McMullen just because of his CIA past.
Yeah, I get that, but he's actually a very smart guy, and his positions were pretty sensible generally, and then of course the Greens. The Greens did really well last time. They did better than they'd ever done. So
Jill Stein.
I think the problem for Libertarians is that the brand needs to be kind of tarted up a little bit.
Well, what do you mean by that?
The brand for years has been kind of crazies. You know that.
Oh, sure.
That it's painted as these kind of crazy guys, and they don't want any government, and blah 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 blah. And and I know that it's a much more nuanced than that, and it's levels of appropriateness my history of the Libertarians I know, like you, is that people have a variety of views on both sides of a variety of tough issues.
Yeah.
So it's much more of an overarching philosophy, which I think is really important in terms of government. I mean, that's, in my mind, that's the big problem today in politics, is people don't have an overarching philosophy of what government is supposed to do, how it's supposed to operate, people's roles in it. And you can come down a lot of different ways, as long as you agree on what the overarching philosophy. If this is a government, if defense is the national government to handle, then by God, they need to do it, the kind of thing. And if something like opening up on this is a great demonstration, COVID, of the federal role and in many ways the brilliance of the federal model that we have under the Constitution, which is the governors really do know their states better, and the mayors know their cities better.
Yeah.
And whereas you want a policy at the top, the execution of a lot of this really needs to happen at a much lower level, where people can understand the nuances of their own communities. So
yeah, the eternal debate within the Libertarian Party is destination versus directional libertarians. Yeah. The destination folks just want to say, this is what the libertarian pure philosophy looks like. This is what a libertarian society will look like. This is where we're going. And that crowd has largely been seduced by populism in a lot of ways in the Trump era. Yeah. That has kind of spun them off in some unlibertarian...
Has the party, Republican Party.
Right. And then there's the directional libertarians, the Cato Institutes, the Tyler Cowens of the world, who say, all right, let's look at the policies. Let's start implementing policies or talking about policies and move libertarian towards a libertarian direction. So it's an eternal struggle, and the hearts and minds online, on social media, that destination crowd does so much better because they're so much more willing to do and say things that are populist than maybe your Alex Narshweths or however you say his name, or Michael Mungers, because they're talking about policy, and that's just not as sexy as starting online fights.
Well, he is Justin does have a better media presence than a lot of the guys who've been running on the libertarian ticket.
You mean like the guy with the big yellow hat? That's not tickling your fancy around?
Oh, yeah, right. That tickles my fancy, right?
All right.
Anyway.
Well, we're almost out of time, so we've got just a few minutes here, but let's talk about, I don't know if you want to skip the dining guide, or if you want to talk about maybe some TV, or what's your call?
Well, I can't say I've dined out a lot lately.
Exactly.
I think last time I was saying, I'm on this keto diet.
How's that going?
Still losing.
You look.
I'm
skinny. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm down about 19 pounds. 18.
Wow.
Pounds. And I'm sure I told you that what triggered it was I saw myself on a keto TV show, and I'm thinking, oh my God, who is that guy with the pot there? That old guy with a pot. Of course, I slump because I'm more comfortable with these shows than a lot of people.
Yeah.
But that doesn't help, when you got a pot. So
right.
I decided to get rid of it. So I've been working on that. But I tell you what, I have spent my wife doesn't cook, so I'm cooking breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, and that's no fun. I feel for people who do that every day. I will say that between my diet, which is no carbs, no potatoes, no root vegetables, no rice, no pasta, and I love Italian. I'm a great Italian cook too. There are opportunities to get really boring, and somehow spaghetti squash doesn't appeal to me a whole hell of a lot. And but I have rediscovered Chinese. That's the main. I have a lot of cookbooks, so I have discovered that Chinese works really well on a keto diet. But the other part of everybody's diet is TV. I don't know what you're doing, but we are watching so much more TV than we have ever watched. Probably more in the last 2 months than I watched in the last 20 years in the aggregate. So every night we sit down and watch 2 or 3 episodes of some, Netflix or Amazon or whatever.
It's always humming in the background. And I try to if I'm going to be a slave to this thing, I'll watch a documentary, or I just watched The Gilded Age from PBS, or we watched One Child Nation on Amazon the other day. One Child Nation about China's one-child policy. And it was...
right.
Oh, Rob, it was heartbreaking and disturbing, and It's a must watch because you just can't believe that this ended when Obama was president.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I love to see that. There's one show that everybody tells me I got to watch because of this farm that we inherited, which is called The Biggest Little Farm. But we've binged our way through. A friend of mine, I did it. He's a lawyer for. He was a war crimes attorney. He's a professor at Georgetown. Smart guy. He chases down Nazi. Treasure himself, art, and he came up with an idea for a show, which is actually a fun show, Blood and Treasure, which is on CBS Prime or whatever, CBS Extra, and we watched our way through. That was fun. We're now watching this World at War, which not World at War, it's something like that. It's a PBS show, which is terrific. It's in its third episode. It's a fiction, of course, and I've mentioned before Babylon Berlin, which is set in back in the 20s and 30s, pre-Hitler Germany. There's a new show that a good friend of mine recommended called Fauda, which he knows that I'm not so fond of Bibi Netanyahu and that crowd, and more sympathetic to the Palestinians since I have businesses over in the Middle East and get to see all that. And he said, well, Rob, even you would like this because it's balanced. And I will say it's balanced. It's Israeli Secret Service. They've got a mole in Palestine, and it shows both sides. Is that they're good and they're bad?
What's that on?
I think it's on could be Netflix.
I think is that the Sacha Baron Cohen, the guy who played Borat? Is he in that? I think I may have started that.
He may be, but it's terrific. And then what's one the other day? Oh, Jack Ryan. We just started Jack Ryan. And oh my God, that's a fun show. And I think we're semi binging our way through that too. So
have you ever?
I don't know what else you watching.
Have you watched Man in the High Castle on Amazon?
I've been told that's on my list. Yes,
I have not watched the new season, but that's really good. Yeah, I love The Queen. I think.
Yeah, The Queen is The Crown. You mean
The Crown? Yes, right.
Yeah, The Crown's terrific.
The best show of all time is The Wire, though. Like as a political person, that's basically a documentary.
Yeah, I have. I think I watched like two of it early on because a lot of people thought I would like it because a lot of it's set on the docks.
Yeah.
In Baltimore, and I for some reason I couldn't get into it. I probably have to go back to it. The other one I forgot to mention, which is actually good, and it's a British series, is The Bodyguard, and that was actually a lot of fun and good actors in that. And so, there's plenty to watch, and of course, now that I'm watching TV every day, I get. Just for you, Rob, on Netflix or Disney Plus. Well, and on Disney Plus, of course, we watched the Mandalorian, that was terrific.
I just watched the new live action Lion King, or it's CGI.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah. Aren't you a little old for that?
Sometimes, here's my secret confession: on a weekend night or whatever, after a long day of reading the news and being depressed. You just want like a Pixar movie, just something on in the background that's fun and stupid.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wonder if you have seen The Tiger King. Have you watched that yet?
Everybody tells me to watch The Tiger King, and then last Sunday, I think it was, I was all ready to do it, and then the New York Times ran a big piece in the magazine about the real Tiger King and about the movie, and kind of the net of it was that why are you watching this stuff? Because it sort of makes him a little bit of a hero in his own way, and he's not. This trade in wild and exotic animals is just horrific, and he was horrific, and what he did, and not only with the murder and everything else, but with the animals, it's just so. I'm ambivalent. Everybody says I got to watch it, including my own daughter, who would normally excoriate me for watching something like this.
Yeah, it's the same as trash TV and Jerry Springer from a generation ago. There's a documentary called Don't F with Cats on Netflix, and it is basically this guy uploads a video where a cat is killed, and these internet sleuths track this person down, and it is a flawless documentary from beginning to end. And the whole time you're going, why am I participating in this? Why am I giving this my attention? And they nail that point home. It's very kind of meta because they are trying to get you to think about watching the type of documentary that they've done and the moral implications of it. It's very well done and very interesting, but it's gripping. Like it's a 3-4 hour ride.
Wow. Well, so next week or 2 weeks from now, when we come back to this, we will have a couple weeks of Georgia, probably South Carolina, and all that, and I'm sure a fair amount to talk about. And I must admit, I'm hoping South Carolina is open carefully, because I have a reservation at Hilton Head for May 9th for a week. So I'm hoping I can go down and at least sit on the beach.
Yeah.
Right now you cannot sit on the beach, and hopefully I will be coming to you from there. But maybe not. I could be disappointed.
We'll see.
Sure, we'll have a lot more to talk about.
I've got a trip planned for June to St. Augustine, Florida, and I don't know if that's going to happen. So we'll see.
More likely than mine does. Hilton Head.
So, all right, Rob. Well, it's great to talk to you.
All right, good to talk. Thank you.
All right.
Keep safe.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I forgot that we were doing a show and not just having a conversation. So thanks to everybody for listening. We'll talk to you soon. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network, and you can find more great shows like this at wearelibertarians.com. Shows like We Are Libertarians with Chris Spangle, The Brian Nichols Show, The Boss Hog of Liberty, Now Hear This with Chris Spangle, Gingerarchy with Tricia Stewart-Mann, and our training podcast, Upward, Libertarian Activism. All of these shows are supported by our patrons. If you'd like to become a Patreon member, visit wearelibertarians.com. Thank you so much for listening to this show.